Dear Mr. Grobman, today is July the 11th. I received your letter with the areas in which you are interested, and it does give me a background upon which to guide myself. I suppose I shall ramble to some extent, like all of us do when we're trying to search our brains for something that happened at least more than 30 years ago. And unfortunately, my wife, that is my first wife, passed away some 10 years ago. I wrote a great deal about my experiences to her. She perhaps would have been able to help me, and also my eldest brother, to whom I shall refer at a later time, to whom I wrote a great deal and with whom I conversed a great deal after my return, also has passed away. I shall, before I complete this, search some areas of my correspondence. Perhaps there's something there which will give me some further material for you. You ask first, how and when did I become a chaplain's assistant? I was a chazan when I was inducted into the Army from Rockaway Park, New York. I was a chazan in Temple Bethel at 116th Street and Rockaway Boulevard with Rabbi Robert Gordis. I would have been able to perhaps be exempt if I had allowed myself to be classified as principal of a school or some such category, but since a chazan was not exempt, I said I would not accept an exemption. So I gave Uncle Sam 3 years of my life. The first part of those years, I really was very unhappy. But until I came into the work, which is the main body of what you're looking for, I realized that at the time I did come into this work, that perhaps God in his way had this very important work for me to be part of, and that therefore I had gone through a period of preparation for it. As you perhaps know, when one goes through the processing period upon entering into the Army, you're set with someone who puts down your category according to your civilian occupation. An Irish fellow was the one who questioned me, and when it came to my work, I told him I was a cantor, and he asked me what was that. Well, after a long back and forth of my explanation to him, he wrote down category undecided. I was in the Army but a couple of days, or perhaps even shorter time, when I made it known to Chaplain Sam Sherman, who originally came from Newton, that chazan was there. He immediately took me out of my regular assignment, had me assigned to him on a day-to-day basis. Very shortly after that, my name came up for shipment, and I found myself with a quartermaster gasoline supply. We thought it was chemical warfare, but found that it was nothing but hauling 5-gallon cans of gasoline plus those tremendous big barrels of oil and such. A whole group of us white-collar men from New York were shipped to the west coast. There I became acquainted with the chaplain at Camp Lewis, Fort Lewis, and helped him a great deal at services. Shortly after that, I was shipped overseas with the same quartermaster company, and we served for a while in England just before the invasion of France. Upon the invasion of France, we went over to France and to set up a gasoline dump. We later found out that we were servicing units of Patton and his famous march. We were then, right after the breakthrough at St. Lo, put into an area known as Laval. At Laval, we saw a poster that there was a chaplain in the area. Since I was serving as the chaplain for the boys in our company, I was given the task of going to the chaplain and let him know that there are many Jewish boys in this area. I went off to Le Mans, capital L-E-M-A-N-S, and there I met Abe Hazelcorn, Chaplain Hazelcorn. He immediately greeted me with tremendous amount of joy. It was shortly before Rosh Hashanah of 1944, I believe. 1943, I'll have to search that out. And then he immediately made plans for us to have services in the big theater, which he was requisitioning in the central square of the town. At that time, there were a tremendous number of army units in the area, and it was a central point for, and would be an excellent location for services. I told him that it would be difficult for him to get me out of the unit I was with, and he told me, leave it to me, which he did. I was taken out supposedly temporarily, but that temporarily became, in a short while, permanent. He introduced me to one family there who were half Jewish, that is, the husband was Jewish. I believe their name was Goldstein. It's hard to remember. But he had hid out from the Nazis. She just shrugged her shoulders every time they asked her about her husband, as though he had left the town. There were, we were told, about 30 Jewish families in that town at the previous time, but they had all fled. And one little incident, which I think might interest you, when preparing the theater for the services, I was standing at the door, and the German PWs who had been preparing, we thought we would use the foyer, which, like European theaters, had big high windows stretching up perhaps about 20 feet up into the air, just outside of the theater itself, and we thought that would be big enough for the number of soldiers that we would have for services. While standing there waiting for the German PWs to come back with another truck full of benches, along came a man with a little boy in his hand. This man, I was later to know, was the name Dunskoy. He was a Polish Jew. He said to me in French a few words which I recognized the word service. And I kept saying c'est fermé, the couple of words that I knew of French at that time. And when I heard the word service, I said to him in Yiddish, vielleicht redt Yiddish. And the tears started to well in the man's eyes. He says, Shem von Jorn nicht gekannt ausreden a Wort, mehr gehabt als der Beutschik wird ausreden a Wort. He was afraid that the boy would give them away, that they were Jewish. He and his wife had fled from Belgium before the advancing horde of the Nazis. They got as far as Le Mans. And even though he was quite sure that the woman where they were lodging in the one room knew that they were Jewish, she still did not give them away. With tears of joy, he embraced me, and what could he do? What could he do? And I was frankly so touched that I started to talk with him and sort of put him to work straightening some benches, something. We became, after a while, fast friends, and Chaplain Hazelcorn, when I visited his home, we brought him many things which he couldn't get. He had an older son who was fighting with the French underground. We met him once or twice, quite an adventurous young man. Just but a little side issue. My rank at that time was that of corporal. That was the highest rank I rose to. Later on, when Abe Hazelcorn had to leave that area, I was transferred to a different, I'm jumping a bit, but in talking about rank, this brings this thought to mind. I was left with the Loire DTC so that I could supervise the chateau which we set up with the children, as well as the work for the Jewish people both in our camp and in the city of Le Mans. And the colonel, who was Jewish, said that he was turning in my request for a field officership. And I told him that it would, in the category of chaplain, because that was actually the work that I was performing, I told him that it would not go through since I was not a rabbi. And as I was leaving that area, he received back word that there was refused under the statement that this commission could not be given in the ETO, and I could not be spared at that time to be sent back to the United States. But enough for that as far as my rank was concerned. I recall well my first encounter with Monsieur Trachtenberg. Monsieur Trachtenberg, as you may have heard from the others, was a Russian who had quite a bit of encounter with the Nazis, and through his brilliant mind was able not only to survive but to outwit them different times. He was an art dealer and a dealer of many different ways. He was in that area working with the French underground. He knew the mayor and everyone, and he came to me and told me in Yiddish, he spoke many languages, French very fluently, thin, tall man, as I recall, Monsieur Morton, he always called me, and I was standing in the hallway leading into the chaplain section of the headquarters. I was transferred through Abe Hazelcorn's works to the headquarters out of which he worked. He had a chaplain's assistant, so I could not become chaplain's assistant, but I could be transferred to the headquarters and then turned to his use, which was the way I was transferred out of the quartermaster company. Monsieur Trachtenberg was there at the entrance, was asking for the Jewish head. He had a story to tell, and he started to tell me the story. I told him I worked with him. He started to tell me the story. I said, "You better come in with me." And we sat down, discussed. He said that he knew of many Jewish children who were hidden out in the area by their parents, the parents who mainly lived in Paris, who knew that their days were numbered, and they were looking for a way so that their children might be able to survive even though they were picked up. This is exactly what happened in many, many cases. For later on, after Hazelcorn had to leave the area and I was more or less in charge, many of the camps had been freed. People came back looking for children, and several of them told me, oh, this child, they knew their parents, knew that their parents had not survived, had been unfortunately eradicated in one way or another. But to come back to the story, he then told Abe Hazelcorn of the whereabouts of some of the children, and he started to go around to pick them up. He found that while the Nazis were in France, the joint distribution had been able to send in money to pay many of these farmers for the upkeep of the children. Actually, many of the farmers were using them for what practically was slave labor. We picked up many of the children and got permission from the mayor to put them into what was the home for wanderers. It soon became quite crowded. And what we did was, where cases were quite bad, we put them into the French hospital, which was very ill-equipped. And supposedly our Jewish doctors were supposedly visiting the French hospital to see their methods. Meanwhile, they sort of accidentally, on purpose, looked over our children, saw many of the wounds, which are sores of different types brought on by lack of proper nourishment or proper cleanliness, and they left all kinds of salves and things of that sort, which they told the French doctors were necessary for the healing of these children. After the children were there a certain length of time, we took them into this Wayfarer's home. When the Wayfarer's home started to clutter up, we smeared the city government and were able to get them to turn over this Chateau de Meillancourt, as it was known. It belonged to the richest Jew in the town. He was eradicated by the Nazis, and the Nazis took it over. When the Nazis fled the area, the French underground army, a raggedy bunch, started to take over, and we were able to get the government, which was really quite something. Naturally, my brother, as I told you, I'd had a lot of correspondence with him, sent us coffee, chocolate bars, types of things which the civilians could not get there at all. We were able to use these as bartering material to get them to turn the Chateau de Meillancourt over to us for our use. And we moved our group in. By that time, I believe there were about 35. When I left there, there were over 100 youngsters in there. But more about that later. Monsieur Trachtenberg was quite a capable person, and having worked with the underground, knew whom to touch and in what way. Money poured into us very, very readily. During the high holiday services, we had already picked up a few of the children, and we knew we needed thousands of francs to pay the farmers. The farmers were only too glad to give up the children because they were a burden to them, taking food and subsistence, and all they wanted were the francs that were owed to them. It seems that when the American armies came in, the line of contact between the joint distribution from Switzerland was broken, and many of them claimed that they had not been paid for the keep of the children for quite some time. We gladly gave them whatever francs they asked for, and as I started to say, during the services, Chaplain Hazelcorn announced about this work, and we passed helmets through them on the soldiers, and the francs just poured. The fellows were only too happy to let us have francs. They had been paid very recently a lot of back pay and things like that, and the francs really meant very little to them, so that they gave us really very, very generously. We had thousands of francs with which to buy back these children. Some of the children were not easy to get, and I'm quite sure that Chaplain Hazelcorn must have given you his experience with the father at the monastery where they had some of the children. I didn't go along with him on this experience. I don't recall just what the circumstances were. There was a fellow by the name of Rosenbusch, and who was from another company, who worked with us very, very willingly, and the fellow who was a chaplain's assistant, his name eludes me, was also very, very, he's very capable in smearing and dealing, and it was so necessary in things of this sort. For clothes, we were able, through a lot of the various camps around, to get the clothes that was X'd out, supposed to be destroyed as battle-torn. We were able to get a lot of that clothes and shorten it to size. Much of the shortening and the taking care of the clothes, Monsieur Trachtenberg took care of, as long as we got the clothes. We also got a great deal of cigarettes were sent to us, which we were able to turn into francs, but more than that, we were able to utilize as a means of barter with the necessary heads. I recall his telling me that there was no confiture, the jams to be procured, and he got, because of having material to barter with, he got 30 jars. There were no shoes, absolutely no shoes available, and here they needed, 40, 50 pairs. They were able to get them, but all they had as far as leather was concerned was a thin outline around the outer edge of the shoe, but it sure was a great deal better than even many of the French children were able to do. One experience I remember very well, in a very small town nearby, we were told that the mayor, a very fine French gentleman, and his daughter, who were both the mayor and the teachers and the heads of the little town, had some survivors. We went, we spoke to them, and strangely enough, the one thing that he missed was his New York Times. He spoke an excellent English, and I arranged to see to it that the New York Times should be sent to him for quite some time afterwards, also through my brother. My brother Lou Shanok was the director of the Jewish Center in New Haven, incidentally, for many years. He died a couple of years ago very suddenly. In speaking to this gentleman, he told us that several times the Nazis knew that there were Jewish children there. They came looking for them, and he closed school because in that way they could not identify them. When they slackened in their pursuit, then he reopened school. There were, I don't recall how many, but about 8, I believe, Jewish children in that little area, and he gladly named them for us and told us where, and we picked them up and had them join. I started to tell you about this father. It was through the good graces of Chaplain Pat McGrath, I think his name was, the Catholic chaplain who was in the chaplain section at that time, that Abe Hazelcorn was able to use pressure upon the father at the monastery there to get the release of the children. When the children came to us, I recall very vividly that each one of them had a picture of a saint, and they were told that this saint was their savior saint, and they were, for all intents and purposes, being brought up as Catholics, and only upon our bringing them back into the fold gradually did it dawn upon them that they were indeed children of Jewish parentage. You ask about activities that I and the chaplain may have had with the JDC representatives. I think it was from the JDC from England that we received some pencils, some crayons, some material, because Abe Hazelcorn suggested that I start a little class for these children to teach them a little Hebrew, teach them a little Yiddish, and they were most avid and most anxious for to learn about Judaism. I started first one class, and had to start from age, I think it was 10 or 9 rather, and up to about 12. Found that it was too large a class, and broke it into 2 sections. And I recall very vividly this youngster, who was perhaps 7, saying to Monsieur Trachtenberg, "Dis que je suis 9 ans," say that I am 9 years. Maybe my French is wrong. Forgive me if it is. I haven't forgotten it. And he kept yelling to him, "Tell him that I am 9 years old. Tell him I am 9 years old," so that he could be part of this experience of taking classes. It's this type of thing which could not help but tug at your heart, make you realize that the spark of Judaism indeed is one that may be tugged at but could never be really erased. I taught these children each Thursday. That was their day off from school. We have Sunday here, but their day off was Thursday. And believe me, I wish the American children would give the attention and the attitude that they gave at that time. But further from the JDC, when I had to leave the area, I was being transferred from the Loire DTC to England to the Shrivenham University, and I knew that from there I would be sent back to the United States, for I would have enough points to be returned. I went to Paris, and at the JDC, if I'm not mistaken, it was Phil Goodman, who was the head at that time, and I explained the situation, told him how many children there were, and urged that they take over. I was told that they would. I was not involved with any of the Jewish organizations which you speak of, the World Jewish Congress, Vad Hatzalah, so forth. Perhaps he was, and if so, I wouldn't know about that because I don't recall his mentioning about that. The package program I think that you are referring to is that as I mentioned, you wrote to my brother, and he had several others send us packages, and its results were that we were able to do a great deal with these packages as barter material for the children. When Hazelcorn had to leave, and I was transferred from headquarters to the Loire DTC, which was a stationary outfit. It was basically an outfit in which the prisoners, the American prisoners, those who had committed crimes of any type, either against the army or against civilian life and were to be confined, were being held. I still continued my work with the Chateau de Méancourt, and I would gather a great deal of candy bars and such from the men in my barracks, the various barracks there. And also I would buy from the PX a whole box of tubes of toothpaste, because they needed in such great quantities, and bring it over there. The Texan who was in charge of the PX thought surely that I was doing some black marketing, and I took him along with me one time. I told him, Tex, come and see my black market. Well, he was a hardened Texan, one of those big raw-boned fellas, but when he saw what was going on, he started to play with some of the children, which the children loved. He became one of the softest guys, would tell me, I've got an extra shipment of this or that, the other thing. Many times he would want to give me for nothing, but I had no trouble telling the fellas that I needed francs for this or for that or the other thing. And we'd pay him so that many of the items were made available to the youngsters that way. Candy bars and shaving items, soap items, as I say, toothpaste and things of that sort. I didn't have any involvement with UNRWA, a Jewish Agency for Palestine, and I have no way of evaluating. Perhaps Hazelcorn or the other had an opportunity. Although I did speak to Hazelcorn back in the United States sometimes later, and I don't recall his mentioning these agencies. The relationships between the DPs and the Army, frankly, I also had no way of knowing, because the outfit, the gas supply outfit, went on and was very near the German last effort and they got more of a contact with the army. I remained with the Loire DTC, as I say, which was camped just outside of Le Mans, and so that I could keep my eyes and my efforts with these various Jewish efforts. The Army's response to our activities was very interesting. We had but to tell the Jewish fellows, for instance, those who had charge of the clothing, or the PX, and the various ones, and Rosenbusch was excellent in that. He would come away with many items which were just absolutely unattainable. Oil, which was necessary for cooking and what have you. Monsieur Trachtenberg had a woman there with him, and they were the caretakers of the chateau. They handled it really quite well. Just what their relationships to each other were, I hardly think was our business. It seemed that there was a very close relationship, and how he subsisted, although I gather he did some black marketing and cigarettes, but I think it's just between myself and yourself rather than for any publication, because of the amount of good work that he did do. I started on the Army's response. At one time we held quite a party for, this was while I was still with the Army headquarters, while Chaplain Hazelcombe was in the area. At the chateau we held a party for the general of the area. I don't recall his name, and showed him around at the chateau, showed him what the work was going on there. He saw the children wearing cut-down army uniforms. He saw that there were many things that were being brought from the army, of course, and said absolutely nothing of this, which was exactly the point of the evening, that he might know what was going on, but in being able, in his position, to hush any possible trying to show that we were violating regulations. There was also a couple of the heads of the town at that dinner. The purpose was naturally for a good relationship, and it worked out for the good of all of what we were doing. Before coming to Europe, I had absolutely not the faintest idea of finding Jewish survivors, and let alone working with them. I would imagine was possibly the very last possible thought that I might have. And as I said before, while with the quartermaster unit, the captain who said that a bitching soldier was a good soldier, and I classify myself as not only having been a good soldier, but an excellent soldier, until the time when I met up with Hazelcorn and was transferred to him and to his work. When the front reached Germany, he received orders to move on. At that time, he could not take along this fellow from whose name eludes me, who was his chaplain's assistant, and the fellow was quite annoyed with him, he told me. Rosenbusch was with a different outfit, and his outfit moved on. I remained. There was a Captain Milton Asbell, who's a dental man, lives near Wilkes-Barre. I will look up his address. I've corresponded with him, who was in the Loire DTC and who knew of our work, and it was through him that it was arranged that I would be transferred to the Loire DTC. he was a good friend of the colonel. I'll think of the colonel's name, who was Jewish, but you'd never know it. And in that way, Hazelcorn could, with peace of mind, go on to where he was assigned, which was closer to the German front, and know that the chateau and all the work that was there would not go up in thin air. I was not involved with sending guns and money across Europe to Palestine. I have no idea how this did develop. This came at a later time after I was either back in England or back in the United States. As I said, I met with Abe Hazelcorn once or twice. Once I recall very vividly, just by chance, we met in New York at Radio City. It was a cold winter day. I was visiting there. He was visiting there. He told me he was on the West Coast. And he told me that the children, many of them were smuggled down to Marseille or to some point in Italy and put on board ships to be shipped to Palestine. How it developed, I imagine Guns and Money was part of that deal, although he didn't develop that. He was, as I'm sure you know, a small person, but quite intense and a good, capable mind. Really a great person to work with. And my Jewish background meant that everything and anything I could do without being asked was naturally forthcoming. It would be almost impossible to adequately characterize the role of the chaplains during this period, especially Abe Hazelcorn. His outlook and his concern and his efforts for everything and everyone Jewish was of the utmost. As I mentioned, he had no compunction about going to Chaplain McGrath for the necessary backing so that they might get the children back. Went around speaking to various ones, arranged for the party with the general and with their higher-ups in the town so that these other facets could be worked on smoothly without any hitch because of complaints possibly through the army. After he left the area, I was, as I mentioned, in this Loire DTC, and one chaplain did come into the area, Aaron Decter by name. When I came back to the United States and came into this area where I am now, I realized that he was in a neighboring town. I met with him, talked with him for a little while. He had a great big area of France to cover, and he was tickled that a person of my background, ability, and capabilities and interest part of the chaplain organization, so that the Jewish men in all of those categories, the city, as well as the camp and the children, could be taken care of. It would be very difficult to begin to analyze the situation if the chaplains were not on the scene. There were so many categories far and above the main line of duty that they served in, and I'm almost positive that it was impossible for them to have any idea of what their needs would be until they came into the various areas. And these two people, I'm quite sure others whom I had no contact with, served very much in the same way. I do know that I met with the chaplain at the Paris headquarters, to whom my desire for commission was referred by the Loire DTC commandant. And he, in Paris, had quite a job there. He did want to have me transferred to him, to his headquarters, but that, as we found out, was not possible because the commandant at the Loire DTC did not allow that to go through. The chaplain at Paris headquarters, incidentally, was Judah Nadich, the one who was the advisor to President Eisenhower on Jewish affairs, who is now at, I believe it's Park Avenue Synagogue in New York. Side, let me go in a little more deeply in the response of the American Jewish GI. They were glad to do everything they could, at least to my knowledge, with few exceptions, for Jewish survivors. We held a couple of Sidorim for all of the Jews in the area, both those from the general headquarters the first year, plus the Jews from the area, and some of the others that were around, the GIs, that is, from the various troops that were around. It was held at the hospital because the rations that were available to us were much better than would ordinarily have been we would have been able to get. We got oranges, which I recall very much delighted the Jews from the area. The fact that they were able to have some, and there were even a few for them to take home, something they hadn't seen or tasted in a long, long time. They were above all delighted that we were able to make Judaism a live, vibrant, meaningful entity to them once again. The second year, we ran the Seder again in the hospital, but this time it was mainly the returnees to the city who came. There were not many GIs in the area, and the ones who came were mainly personnel who were off duty at the hospital. One other instance, I think I mentioned that I sent to my brother that the parochas at the little synagogue, which was at the end of this alley, which you could only find if you knew the parochas, you know that was there at the end of the alley. The parochas was missing. Evidently, I was told that it was used as a house of refuge for those who were fleeing before the Nazis, some place for them to hide overnight. Evidently, someone had used it for wrapping or something. The Torah and the Shofar and several of the books were in the Ark, and we were able to use them for our GI services. Incidentally, we held services there pretty much the whole time I was there. For Friday evenings, many GIs would come, and we had food from, I guess it was from the joint. We had matzah also at the Sidurim, plus gefilte fish canned, which I believe the joint or one of the other organizations, Chaplain Hazenkorn or any of the other chaplains, would be able to better tell or remember where those foods came from. But at the little synagogue, I wrote to my brother that and I wrote to my synagogue, to my former temple in Rockaway Park, that the parochas was missing, and they made up a beautiful parochas, which was inscribed, duly presented by Temple Bethel of Rockaway Park to this synagogue in Le Mans, France. And they held a big event at the time of a presentation, And I had pictures taken of myself with the gentleman, I don't remember his name, who was the president of the Jewish community in Le Mans. And I sent a copy of it to my brother, and he forwarded it on to the Jewish forwards. They made quite a feature of it that time. Somewhere in my archives I have a copy of that picture. But there were many GIs there that night of the celebration, and they bid on the various honors to help see that there were funds for the Jewish community to begin to turn towards beginning Jewish life around the synagogue. In many ways, I know that when I was leaving for the chateau, many times I would ask different ones, and they would give me candy bars, chewing gum, different things from their rations, their weekly rations from the PX, so that I might have a better supply to give to the children. And almost invariably, several of the men would come with me. We took the truck that was going into town and walked from one spot to the chateau, where we frolicked with the kids. And as I mentioned about the Texan, and he, after coming there once, was able to help too. So that, to my experience, with very few exceptions, the GI was as helpful as he possibly could be. I'm sure those who had direct contact with camps have perhaps more harrowing tales to tell. There was one person especially that perhaps you have contacted, but I want to mention him to you, is Dr. Milton B. Asbell. I don't have his home address here, but I do have a rather recent letter from him on stationery, which is marked Sussex, SUSSEX Medical Center, 1001 North Kings Highway, Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and the zip code is 08034. It was, as I mentioned, through him that I was able to be transferred to the static Loire DTC, of which he was the dental medical man, so that I might be able to stay in that area and to keep all of the Jewish activities going. He and I had several very good experiences while we were there, and I'm quite sure if you haven't already contacted him, that contacting him will give you some other aspects which either I've forgotten about or I don't know. I've just re-listened to some of this, and it's very obvious to anyone who has been in this work that the organization which provided the foods was the Jewish Welfare Board, was the one that provided the foods, of course. Just comes back to mind. Another little correction that I want to make, that is not actually an omission, but a correction in direction. The packages that I refer to at various times, having come from my brother, he was not the only one who sent us packages. At one time we tried to organize quite a package brigade, sort of, to have people from the United States send us packages so that we could supply foods for the children at the Chateau de Meillancourt. However, we did get some packages. It did not work out near as well as we had hoped. Several people did receive packages. I know Rosenbusch did. I believe Hazelcorn received some, and I know, as I say, my brother sent me some, a couple of other people sent me some, but it was not of any lasting or long duration time. Incidentally, one of the important ingredients in any of these packages was tobacco. The cigarettes were all too difficult to reach in the black market, and any tobacco that came in cans or in other way was a very, very valuable help in this work. Another little sidelight that I might mention, while with the Loire DTC, I was in the chaplain section, a part of the chaplain section. There was a Catholic chaplain by the name of Baldwin. I don't recall the name of the Protestant chaplain, but in order that I might function better and they might look more pleasantly towards a non-com being a pretty much equal acting as they, I organized a choir both for the Protestant services, and even learned something about the Mass, so that they might have a choir for the Catholic services. Chaplain Baldwin gave me a couple of men who were altar boys in civilian life who knew the Mass. They gave me copies of Mass. I don't recall what it was, the music, and I organized what turned out to be a pretty nice choir for them. Meanwhile, I learned something about the Catholic religion, but this may help keep their attitude on a nice high plane, so that I had a great deal of freedom in doing what was necessary for the various the GIs, as well as the children, and as well as the civilians in the city. Many were the times that I was able to use the chaplain's jeep, as well as some of the materials and the freedoms and the various privileges which were the place of one in the chaplaincy. And by that I mean am able to look more favorably towards me, so that I could function in a better fashion for the Jewish men. I've just replayed this tape, and I want to correct what seems to me to have been an error. In speaking about Monsieur Trachtenberg, I mentioned that he spoke Yiddish. I believe I'm in error in that. As I recall now, he spoke French. He spoke other languages, Russian among them. However, we conversed at first more difficultly, and then at a later stage better, in French. I should somewhere have one or two of the letters which he sent me in French. When I returned back to the United States, he was constantly seeking more material, tobacco and so on, for various deals to receive food and jams, type of things, difficult to get. And I recall his writing me even after I got back to the United States. We had a little difficulty at first in conversing, but as I recall, later on, our conversations, my knowledge of French and his knowledge of English, became much better, so we were able to converse. Hazel Corners, I recall, was able to converse with him quite freely. He spoke French rather well. I wanted to correct this error which has sprung up in memory over the years.